one really cool thing was his native brother, Jason, who'd recruited me to the Baldies. He'd go up to him if we'd see him uptown. He'd go up to him and he'd say, "Hey, are you a white knight?" And if they said yeah, he'd be like, "Okay, next time we see you, if you're still a white knight, we're going to whoop your ass." But that was really good because it gave them a chance to think about it. Like, do I really want to stand on this? Is this really what I'm about? And it actually had the effect of flip. He helped flip a couple of them.
Okay.
You know, but then if they did want to stand on that, then they knew what was coming to them.
Right.
And you know, we would drive them out. And that's what we did. So that was part of my growing up as a teenager.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dialogue to Destiny. Our goal is to engage in discussions that lead to personal and systematic change. These conversations can broach subjects that some may find offensive. It is not the intent of Dialogue to Destiny to in any way offend. Our intent is to encourage open dialogue so that collectively we can all move forward.
We've been down for way too long, but now they saying we're equal. Then I'm the one that's wrong for trying to wake up all my people. Speaking facts about the system, how the wicked is ruling. But now the lights is on, it's time for us to do the schooling. Tell the whole truth, salute, this knowledge is heaven sent. Politicking in a cipher, breaking bread with my constituents. We melanated and all hated. Let's just keep it real, sharing from the mind every time. That's how we truly feel. With verbal buckshots to the chest, aiming for the kill. Then bringing new life to get your mind right. There's war up in the field. So stay in.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Dialogue to Destiny. Today we're going to discuss the racism and the white man's role in helping to combat racism in today's America. And joining us in today's conversation, we brought back Kieran, our buddy from work. He's, you know, we all know him as a union person, but I know that Kieran has spent a large part of his life in this struggle and in this fight to combat racism. And I just wanted to have him on to kind of give us an idea of some of the things he's done, maybe some things he's been involved in growing up that has led him to believe that this is a struggle that he'd want to involve himself in. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Kieran, and let us know a little bit about yourself and what you bring to this conversation.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me back. I really like this show. Enjoy the debate and the conversations that you guys have. So I'm really honored to be back on the show. My name is Kieran. I grew up in South Minneapolis. Grew up in Central neighborhood, which was a mixed neighborhood. And in Minneapolis, a mixed neighborhood was considered a black neighborhood back then, right?
True.
So I kind of had the experience of growing up around, black kids and native kids and white kids and seeing how people from outside our neighborhood looked at our neighborhood. So I think in some ways that was some of my first way of sort of identifying with people of other colors and nationalities, was the fact that people looked at our neighborhood a certain way. And then also, my parents were involved in, civil rights type of stuff. And so they instilled a strong idea about, the importance of black freedom in terms of everybody's freedom. And then, so that was kind of my start, as a young person.
All right, that's cool. Steve, you want to kick it off with a question or something you want to address?
I'll put it like this. Before I knew you, I knew you.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
All right.
And I think you know where I'm going with this, because I went to school with some of your cousins.
Yep.
And I'm still tight with Sean to this day.
Yep.
He's still cool.
Yep.
New Pat.
Yep.
New Maggie.
Yep.
Then I met the parents.
Right.
Kathy, I believe. And
Yep.
John.
Yep. My uncle and aunt. Yep.
Right. I knew they were special, man, when the first time that my wife met them.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say within the last 2 weeks, how are they doing?
They're doing good. They both got COVID.
Okay.
Yeah, but they both, made it through okay, which was good because, my uncle especially has had some health problems.
Okay.
But yeah, they're both doing good. Thanks, man. I'll let them know that you said what's up. Yeah.
My wife asked about them all the
cool.
time.
Yeah,
Man. Her and
yeah.
Kathy got real tight down at Hoffman Estate.
Okay.
At the AT&T little thing they got down there.
Right.
They got real tight. And then I met you and I seen the work that you've put in.
Yeah.
And the work, the kids, their parents, and you seem to be colorblind.
Yeah.
Now I know. I hope you don't mind this.
Yeah.
The Irish dander gets up,
Yeah.
man, when you guys see unfairness.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what color the unfairness is in.
Right.
You guys address it
Right.
honestly with that's not cool.
Right.
So I really appreciate you being on here to speak from
Thanks,
that
brother.
point of view and let people know that all your help don't look like you.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's people out there that are genuinely willing to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's inbred in them, it's in their core. And you're one of those people. So I'm glad
Thanks,
to have
brother.
you on here, Kieran.
Appreciate it. If I could just riff off what you're saying, because one thing that was real important to me as a teenager and helped kind of put me on my path too was that I had been sort of separated from that part of my family because my dad is John's brother.
Okay.
And he had left our family. He was a Vietnam vet. He had a lot of struggles. So after he left, I kind of was separated from the Malloys for many years, and then I got reacquainted with them as a teenager. And I started hanging out with the boys mainly, you know, and they were part of an anti-racist skinhead crew called the Baldies, and the Baldies was a multiracial skinhead crew that hung out uptown, hung out at First Avenue, and then this Nazi skinhead crew showed up, and so they were kind of like looking at each other, eyeing each other, and then finally, you know, basically they decided we can't let this Nazi crew, this white supremacist gang, function. And so that was like right when I'm like 15, 16, 17, 18. So I'm like all these important years of learning, and we kind of were struggling against this Nazi gang and basically pushing them out of uptown, pushing them out of First Avenue, you know, standing up to them. And that's where I learned a lot, and from my cousins, but also from like African American guys that were in the Baldies, Native American guys that were in the Baldies, Hmong guys that were in the Baldies. And those were kind of like my big brothers in the sense of, you know, not blood, but my cultural big brothers, and you know, people I kind of aspired to be like and want their respect and also just learning from them. And yeah, so that was a big part of it, and Patrick was a kind of a key part of that. I remember I have this memory of when they finally drew the line with this gang who was called the White Knights, and one of their leaders had pushed down a Hmong kid who was in the Baldies in the punk rock pit at First Avenue. And I remember Patrick, you know, things had been tense for a few weeks, and I remember Patrick sticking his finger in the leader of the Nazis' eyes, sticking his finger right in his eye and being like, "You're done, fat." Because he was a real big dude, so Patrick was like, "You're done, fat. You're done." And after that, we just like made it they weren't welcome anywhere, and if we saw them, you know, one really cool thing was his native brother Jason, who'd recruited me to the Baldies. He'd go up to him if we'd see him uptown. He'd go up to him and he'd say, "Hey, are you a white knight?" And if they said yeah, he'd be like, "Okay, next time we see you, if you're still a white knight, we're gonna whoop your ass." But that was really good because it gave them a chance to think about it. Like, do I really want to stand on this? Is this really what I'm about? And it actually had the effect of flip. He helped flip a couple of them.
Okay.
You know, but then if they did want to stand on that, then they knew what was coming to them.
Right.
And you know, we would drive them out, and that's what we did. So that was part of my growing up as a teenager.
Okay.
Sound like the old 70s movie, The Warriors,
Yeah,
man.
it had a little bit of that too, because luckily, you know, the guns didn't really get involved until right at the very end. Mostly it was still, you know, people fist fights, and there might be some weapons, but luckily we didn't have to deal with guns the way it is now, you know.
Yeah.
Throwing curl them up and throw them fast
Yeah,
and throw them hard.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it was a lot of that. It was brass knuckles and baseball bats, maybe.
No, we didn't go that far,
Yeah.
man. We would get all bruised up, lumped up, man. And 2 weeks later, man, we'd be hooked up with the same dude we was locked up with.
Right.
You know, well, let me ask you guys, man. What would you define racism as? I mean, if you had to just put a one sentence definition to it, what would you define a racist or racism as?
Yeah. I mean, for me, in this country, it's white supremacy. So I think the big thing about it is that it's power. It's not just prejudice, but it's being able to back up that prejudice with power. In some ways, I think, you know, it's nice if people aren't prejudiced, but if someone's prejudiced, it doesn't really matter. But it's if they can back it up with the power of the state, of the banks, of the corporations, of the police, then it's a system, and then you know, it becomes a real oppressive. So I'd say in this country, racism is white supremacy.
What do you define it as? So it's only white supremacy?
Well, I'd say
Because they have the power.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. I see some of that, and I see something that's going on generationally at different periods of time. I see it happening again now with the suppression of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
What happened after Reconstruction?
Mm-hmm.
They hurry up and got rid of the black politicians.
Right.
It became a rise to the Ku Klux Klan,
Yep.
and it was suppressing the black vote
Yep.
and getting people out, black folks out of office.
Mm-hmm.
You go a little bit further down the road, man. After each and every war, even after World War I, you think about that Red Summer. The Red Summer was about black folks voting, owning property, and having jobs.
Yep.
You look at the 60s, or we can go back to the black codes, then to the 60s, and Jim Crow and all of that right before the 60s. But in the 60s, a problem with voters' rights.
Mm-hmm.
When Obama got elected,
Mm-hmm.
even before now, you got to remember during that time there when he got first elected, that 4 years later, man, they threw out 53,000 votes in Georgia. Which why I don't think that Trump thought it was a big ask for 11 or 12,000. Oh man, I know you can do it for me. We heard it. We all heard the tape.
Right.
Now here we are in 2021, and in order to keep certain people in their place, I'm gonna take away your ability to vote. See, now that you've got it in your mind how the system works, let me move the goalposts, tilt and slant the playing field, man, and put grease on it, and say, just got to try a little harder. Well, every time that we've tried a little harder to participate in the system on a whole, it changes. The rules change. They make it more difficult for us to be in here. And or being part of the system, I can only see it, as you mentioned, being a systemic thing, being systemic, and their most powerful weapon. The hate you with power. Go ahead, Dack.
No, I listen to what you're saying here. Well, let me give you what I see. I kind of see racism as it's on a spectrum similar to what autism is. See, I think sometimes people have a tendency to think that if you're not overtly racist, if you're not using racist terms, that exempts you from being labeled as a racist. Racism to me is a feeling of it's a hatred for another race of group. But I agree with Kieran in the sense that I do believe racism is a white man's illness. Now I do, Steve and I have had this conversation before. In America, I personally don't see how black people can be racist against white people. And the reason I say that is because I say that when a black person does not like white people, he can lay out a timeline in his life of negative experiences he's had with white people. And I think that if any black person is being honest, you're not going to find any black person that's more than 5 years old that hasn't experienced some sort of racism.
Right.
And and to counter that, I don't think you'll find more than 5% of white people that have had negative experiences with black people. See, you'll hear white people talk about how their cousin's boyfriend was jumped by some black guys. But if you go around and ask 100 white people, and if they're being honest, give me an example of a negative experience that would have created these animus feelings that you have against other races of people. Give me an example of where somebody has done something to you personally that warrants that.
Right.
So that's why that's where I think racism. Now, I do believe black people can be racist against other races of people, but in America, I personally don't believe in the concept of black people being racist against whites. And what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on what your terms are, what you mean by it. Like, 'cause some people, when they say racism, they're using it as another word for prejudice.
Yes.
And I'd say, anybody can be prejudiced, but again, to me, I think the problem with that is it becomes just this individual thing about how good an individual person you are, and it loses sight of this bigger system that we all have to live under, and that we all actually either participate in or are have to live under. And I did want to say, so I agree with you about that. I want to say one thing though, that I agree with your point about it being an illness for white people, and then going back to Steve's point about Reconstruction too, because one interesting thing about Reconstruction is not only did it grant, black folks a whole bunch of freedoms that obviously they hadn't had under slavery, but also the first time that whites in the South poor whites got public education was under Reconstruction. The first time that white farmers, like I'm talking about small farmers, not the plantation owners, but the small farmers got some land and got some access to loans and stuff was under Reconstruction. So you're right, it's an illness because, in my view, the system of white supremacy is used to hold together this whole oppressive system, that includes the oppression of women is another fundamental part of it, and I think that it's in the interest of the vast majority of people to be against it, ultimately, even if there's some, petty privileges that are granted to you for your participation in it. So even though in Reconstruction, poor whites actually got things that they were never getting before under the black Reconstruction governments or mixed Reconstruction governments, they fell for this bullshit from the Klan and from the white plantation owners to try and go back to the old system, because they, through appealing to this idea of like, oh, you're white, you're better than them, and you can see similar stuff to how Trump did it. Like I think, like Trump wasn't really in the interest of poor white people. He wasn't doing anything to help poor white people except this psychological idea that you're better, and so people have to really confront that. Like, are you such a wounded person that your ego is more important than the actual freedom and livelihood of your family,
Well, yeah, I think skin color is probably the biggest factor in everything. You got something you want to add, Steve? Or?
There was a couple of good points in there. I would just say that we've had experiences and things that have happened to us that makes us see another race as racist towards us. I know for a fact, and I'll share a story, that there are situations that white folks go through that they feel that cat was racist. Now, way back in grade school, there was this cat that transferred in, white dude. Didn't really bother anybody. There was these 3 dudes that were determined to just make his life a living hell, 3 brothers. One day he picked up one of them old gray metal garbage cans that used to have in the school, man, and got busy with it. Now, some people will say I was wrong because I said that's just what y'all get. You should have left him alone. The cat wasn't doing nothing to you. I wonder what his outlook is on black folks and what it is that he may have taught his kids or his younger siblings. And that alone, that incident could perpetuate a jaded or untrue look of a race of people because of his experience. Well, and I think that sometimes, because I know people, man, that first thing came out of their mouth is, I hate white people. That is a racist comment to me, because you do not know who that person is. You have not sat down and fellowship with them. Y'all have not sat down and broke bread, man, and just sat down and had that dialogue back and forth. So for you to just use that strong word, I hate that white person, you only hate them for one reason. Same way you get hated.
But it goes back to what I was saying, Steve. If like I had just asked you before we got on here, if you come across 100 dogs, and 100 dogs bite you, are you going to assume that 101st dog is going to bite you as well? I mean, see, I believe that what you're describing is the experiences that black people have had. Now, and I'm not gonna justify the fact that those boys were picking on him, but it could have been just a case of bullying too, right? It could have not been tied to race at all. It could have just been that we see a new kid, he looks like he's weak, we're gonna pick on him.
But that's his experience.
I understand that.
That's his experience. Well, and he experienced it by people who did not look like him. Just like I'm experienced things and you experience things that people who don't look like me.
Well, let me give you an example. See, let me give you an example of something I personally experienced.
All right.
Not something that somebody else experienced. Okay. Now, I remember, when I was growing up, we had we had some land up at Breezy Point Resort. You know where Breezy Point
Yes,
is,
I
right?
do.
Okay. So we would go up there, and I remember I was like maybe 11, 12 years old, and anybody knows me knows I love to fish. So there was a little creek that kind of ran from the lake in through the resort, right?
Okay.
So I was just down there fishing one day by myself. I got on my bike, told my mom I'll be back in an hour. So went down there, cast a few times. And I remember hearing this truck cross over the bridge, and they got like a half a block up. And I remember hearing the tires like I heard them hit the brake, and they backed up. So these grown men come down there, down where I was fishing, because I was by myself. They come down there, and they're like, "What are you doing down here?" Calling me a boy and everything. I mean, you would have thought this was back in the 50s or something. Mm-hmm. And I said, "I'm fishing." So one of the dudes, they were drinking beer. So one of the dudes pours his beer over my head. They're spitting on me. They're pushing me. They're like, "If we ever see you down here again, boy, we're gonna kill you and throw you in that water." So here I am, 11 and 12-year-old boy, riding back through the resort. Got probably Miller Lite dripping from my fro. Crying. Can't wait to get back to the resort where my parents are, to tell them what happened. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I mean, what I'm saying is, as a black person, every moment of every day, every experience, every encounter that you have, if you're conscious, if you're a conscious black person, because there's some people out here that have no consciousness, but if you're a conscious black person, like James Baldwin says, one of my favorite quotes: "If you're a conscious black man living in America, you live in eternal turmoil." Because every encounter that you have, if somebody rides by you on the freeway and they flip you off, the first thing that comes to your mind is, it because I'm black? Mm-hmm. You get turned down from an apartment, is the first thing, is it because I'm black? Somebody standing in a restaurant looking at you, now they could be admiring anything else about you. But because we've been conditioned, because of our life experiences, to always go to the race issue, that's why we're having this conversation, because I think that we need to have perspectives of different races, and even within the black community, different perspectives on things. But I know that my experience as a black man is where, like I said, I cannot remember going more than a couple weeks where I truly did. I just had something happen at work today, and the first thing that comes to my mind, well, did he say that because I was black? I mean, do you see? To me, and that's part of white privilege, and part of what white people never have to consider. They never consider if they were mistreated because they were white. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things you're describing are things that I've heard from lots and lots of people, and I think that is part of what it is to live under white supremacy, is that there's like these two guys, like, what could they possibly, how could what you were doing have possibly infringed on their lives at all? And yet here they are thinking that the most important thing they got to do is to terrorize a young kid. You know
Exactly.
what I mean? And so I think you're right that's this illness. It's this illness in their way of thinking, and it's promoted. It didn't just drop from the sky. It's promoted in all kinds of ways, from the government to the television to handed down in families and stuff. But I think, for me, I think one of the big things to do is to try and convince white folks that's not in your interest. In fact, it's not only not in your interest, but it's helping hold back the possibilities of true freedom and true equality. And not just for black folks and for other people of color, but for you. You look at where white supremacy was the sharpest in this country, and it's everywhere. Like Malcolm said, if you're south of Canada, you're in the South, right? But in the South, right, there was Jim Crow and stuff, but that's also where whites were the poorest. So the sharpest place where white supremacy was also where white people had the worst standard of living. And I think there's a relationship between, the stronger white supremacy is, the more oppressive the entire society is. And so I think, one of the questions that always comes up is, well, how are you able to convince white people to be against racism since they are getting these privileges? And we can talk about, some people think they get a lot of privilege, some people think they get a little, but whatever it is, how can you how can you convince white people to be against it since they're getting this from it? And my approach is that that white people do get some privilege out of it, but they don't get real power, they don't get real freedom. Only a small elite of mostly white people get that. And it is in our interest to stand up against it, because the possibility of a real freedom, a real multiracial, non-racial future freedom is so much better than the ability to terrorize some kid in your community,
Yeah.
We see how long that this process has been going on with the voting, the supremacy, and everything else. Now here we are in 2021. Things have gotten worse, not better, but yet and still the same tactic is being deployed. At some point in time, isn't this like doesn't this look like what the terminology for insanity is? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, and then not getting that result. Well, here we are about to do the same thing again, and we're about to get another lower rung. We're not climbing up, man. We're not living up to the possibilities of what this country was sold as. The experiment was sold as. We keep going back to areas of comfort, not good, but areas we're comfortable in. And that has done us no good. It has not pushed us forward at all. And there's trust and relationship that needs to be built on both sides. My Trump thing, both sides. But it's a serious thing that has to be done. We in this country haven't gotten nowhere by ourselves, whether it's been the German, the Irish, the Italian, the white, the black, the Jamaican, the Haitian. None of us have gotten anywhere without no help at all. And it's been a menagerie of people, a bunch of different colored people that have come together. I mean, there have been people out there that have fought, man. There's one guy, I want to think his name is John Leatherer or something of that nature, man. And a lot of people don't know who that individual is. There's a picture I seen a long time ago as a kid, man, of a guy, white dude, out on the front lines of the Civil Rights March, man, on crutches out there walking. And he's out there marching with everybody else. They cracked up at this white dude because he kept saying, because he lost his right leg to cancer. So he kept walking around, left, instead of left, right, left. This cat was out there, left. And they just cracked up, man, because he had a good spirit. And he was really down for the cause. He was there, man. This cat could have sat at home, ran his mouth, man, and everybody would have thanked him for him voicing, not being silent and compliant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This cat got out there, hopped around on one leg, and marched, walked the walk, as well as talked it. People like that are willing to help you, man, to go that far out of their skin, and I'm using that word intentionally, come out of their skin and into a cause and operate from their spirit. Become colorblind.
Well, I mean, I know for me, I'm never gonna just discredit the contributions that other people have made in our struggles. I mean, you go back to the civil rights movement, you even go back to slavery. There have always been people outside of the black community that have contributed to our progress. But what I'm talking about, and I'm not saying that every individual white person is racist, because I knowing Kieran for how long have I known you? 15 years. I don't believe that Kieran has a racist bone in his body. So what I'm saying is, at this point, it's not just enough to say that you're not racist. I mean, you actually have to be in a position where you aggressively and openly speak out and stand on the side of people moving forward. Because, like I said, somebody that wants to be non-racist in private, to me, they really, I feel like they don't do a lot to contribute to the cause. I just don't. But going back to kind of what Kieran was talking about, I believe that it's going to have to be people like yourself that's going to have to carry the message back to other white people. You know, and I had mentioned to you a guy, Tim Wise, that I like to listen to, you know, and he had talked about something like that on one of his videos, where he was talking about how when black people bring their concerns to white people or just other people that just aren't empathetic to their cause, when black people bring their concerns to them, to most of them, it just sounds like you know, complaining and whining. You know, so it is important to have you know, allies that are for one thing understanding and you know, have a true understanding of what they're talking about. But it is important to have those people take the message back to their families at Thanksgiving, to their community. When you hear something, step up and actually speak out. I mean, I'll be surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised. Some of the people that I worked with at AT&T, you know, I didn't know that they were so comfortable stepping out of that racial comfort zone either. I mean, because when I see them posting stuff on Facebook or other venues, man, and they're actually, you know, condemning racism, and I mean, man, it really touches me, you know, because I'm not accustomed to seeing that, but I've always known that there were people out there like that, but to hear these people say, you know, I mean, actually become, you know, distance themselves from their own family members and stuff over racism, man, that's a very powerful thing.
It's hard, yeah, for real.
You know,
I think a couple things, off a few things that you guys have said. The one thing, going way back, Steve, to that example you gave about your grade school and the fight, I think one of the important things is, like, that's why it's really important to be able to understand the system. Because sometimes anybody's capable of having a negative interaction with an individual. You know, you can run into individuals coming from all different ways of life. And in the neighborhood I grew up in, man, we got chased by white bullies, we got chased by black bullies, we got chased by, you know, mixed groups, you know, and our group was mixed, you know what I mean? And so if the only lens you had to understand it was just like what was up in front of your face, then it might have been really easy to, like, become a racist because I got beat up by this black kid or something. So it's important to try and get people to see the bigger picture of what's going on in the entire society, and I think that actually helps you make sense of it. It, like, makes you smarter to be able to do that. And then I think you're right too, Dack, about, I mean, I think it's really important because I think sometimes some anti-racist white people will be like, well, I'm not down with that. I'm not down with the racist redneck shit, but I'm not black, so I don't know where my place is. You know what I mean? Like, I can't just go, you know, join black groups or something like that. But I think in some ways that's why it's important to have, like, a role model, not just so, like, you know, follow me, but just like an example of how to live your life. Like, you don't have to be tied to white supremacy just because the system wants you to be. You can teach your kids a different way of living. You can relate to people a different way. You can organize and make it a conscious effort to. And I think that does have an impact. I know it helps me to be able to see people, you know, that are standing outside of that stuff, like you're describing some of our coworkers. Yeah, and then the more that you do it, the easier it becomes for the next person. Because if they see somebody else doing it, then you don't feel like such an oddball. And one of the things white supremacy really did was to try and police its own ranks, right? And that's one reason why, you know, like, you know, white women were really victimized anytime any of them fell in love with a black guy or something, right? You could face, you're basically being said you're facing the same kind of death that we give out to black folks if you do that. And so, you know, there was a big effort to try and police white people into this being part of that. And so anybody that's a role model away from that, I think, is an important thing. I'm talking too much.
No, man.
I start getting up on my soapbox.
Oh no.
That's what it's about. That's what it's about. People need to hear from you.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the things I mentioned at the study group that I'm involved in. It's a group that's out in, whether it's Eden Prairie, Lakeville, somewhere. It's way out, you know, that way. And I told them that there comes a point in time where we need to sit down and have that tough conversation. And you, my Caucasian brother, need to know it's okay to sit down and not search for your words, just search your heart. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that you know that it's okay
right.
to have that conversation
right.
with me.
Yeah.
Because the conversation I want to have with you is probably not what you want to hear,
Right.
but it's so necessary to be had. And sometimes it's hard to hear what I need to hear as a brother, and it's hard for you to hear what you need to hear as a white brother. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the key word is brother. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it's hard to have that, but we need to assure one another that there's enough love between us that when we sit down and have this honest conversation,
Right.
like family does, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That I get up, I shake your hand and say, man, peace. You know what I'm saying? Love you, bro. See you, man.
Yeah.
I got something to think about now.
Right.
You know, something
Right.
to work on. And we need to be that way and stop being so dismissive of
Right.
one another,
Right.
or packaging people up with stereotypes and making them real small so it's easier to, you know, throw them in the garbage and keep walking.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's something that we need to stop doing, and it's only for our own comfort and our own lack of growth that we do it. Now, if we want to grow those things around us, we've got to stop that and do this.
Right.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense to me, man. I like that. You know, what is it that you guys think we can? What do you think is necessary to move the mindsets of people in this country forward beyond race? You know, when Obama, you know, and I was wrong because I thought Obama would take more of a lead in this, because I was saying when he in his last year of his presidency, I said Obama was going to lead this country through the third leg of racial healing. You know, and I mean, let me explain to you what I'm talking about. You know, approximately 150 years ago, we had Emancipation Proclamation, right? So the slaves were freed, and you know, so that made it so that, hey, it wasn't legal in this country for one man to own another man. So we went pretty much close to 100 years from that. And we had the civil rights movement because there were still laws in place that created like a two-tier class, you know, citizens in this country.
The black
Absolutely.
laws is what they were called.
But neither one of those addressed the heart of the white man. You see what I'm saying? I mean, so you know they couldn't just blatantly, you know, keep you out of stores or restaurants or whatever. You know, they had some rules, but in their private homes, in their private communities, their hearts were still filled with the same sentiment that they had in the 60s and in the 1860s, as far as I'm concerned. So I thought that when Obama would left the White House, I was like, Obama will become the next Martin Luther King. I thought his legacy would be more tied to his post-presidency civil rights work than his presidency. But you know, he for some reason didn't take the mantle. And what's odd about it, I believe that Joe Biden is doing more to heal and deal with the heart of the man than Barack Obama did. I know you're not a big fan of either one, but
so there's a lot to talk about. So for me though, what happened over this last year that was so important, and the thing that does give me hope, because you're talking about, Steve, about how things feel like things getting worse, but I'm gonna say a couple things about what gives me hope. Is so I grew up like I mentioned in central neighborhoods. So I used to go up to 30th in Chicago to buy comics and candy as a little kid. I'd either go to 38th in Chicago or 35th in Chicago. Those were the two corner stores that were closest to me, right? Go up there to buy some Now and Laters or a comic for 25 cents or whatever. And I remember when Cup Foods actually opened. I remember that because we were all like, "Are they trying to fool people that they're Cub Foods? What is, you know, what's that name?" So like when George Floyd got murdered on that corner in the most, you know, horrendous, I mean, public lynching in broad daylight in front of a crowd of people by cops that were almost smiling about it as they did it. You know, I kind of had this. I mean, everybody had a terrible feeling in their gut, but I think one of mine feeling was like, what are we going to respond? What are we going to do? Because what if? And I think that what happened was that Minneapolis, where most people in the world never heard of Minneapolis, now everybody in the world knows about Minneapolis because people in Minneapolis did stand up and did fight back and did basically say, this is not going to be forgotten. This is not going to be swept under the, you know, we're not going to be known as a city where this happened and was okay. And when I was out on the streets watching it and seeing it, it was black folks for sure, but there was white folks, there was Native Americans, there was Latinos, there was Somalis. It wasn't just black folks out there. You know what I mean? And it was it was a bunch of people that I think if you would say to them, "Are you ready to get rid of white supremacy for something else?" I think people would have been like, "Yeah, fuck that. We're done with that. Excuse my language, but you know, we're on. You know, we can't live this way anymore." And I think there's my son's generation. I think they already. And I appreciate you saying about not having a racist bone in my body, but you know, you're constantly reinforced with shit. So I find myself like, you know, having to double check different things about my own self, you know, but I already feel like my sons are so much less. They're growing up with freer minds than what I had, you know, or maybe what we had, our generation, that they're already be able to see reality clearer than what we could, you know. So that does give me hope. And I think that the fact that Biden's doing what he's doing, to get back to your point, is that he has to, because there's this thing happening. And if they don't catch up to it, it's going to leave them all behind, you know. And so, and I think it should just keep pushing. You know, I mean, we need to keep pushing. If people want to see good things from the government, keep pushing. Don't just stand around applauding the government for one or two things they do right. Just keep pushing.
And I think that's one of the good byproducts, if you can say that, from this Floyd thing, because every issue has been that portion of the community's issue. It's the Somali issue. It's the Native issue.
Right.
I think what they see now is this is the issue of this community, and all of us live here. And that's why you see all of us here, because we all have experienced something or seen something, man, that just don't taste right, just ain't sitting right with us, man. It's not sitting good. You know, the optics are bad. How it sits in my stomach, like bitterness, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't just us. It was everybody within that community. Everybody wants to see that community get better. They're tired of, you know, the police having a little bit of rope and the community gets a whole lot of cowboy. You know what I mean? All the hooting and hollering, you know, pulling up on sidewalks and looking at you and stuff, man. You've seen them just sit up right up on the sidewalk. You got to walk off the sidewalk, get in the street, walk around the car, and then go where you want to go. I mean, they have that much a lack of respect for the community and the people within it. So I will always say this over and over again. You can't take a guy from a second, third, or fourth tier suburb, man, and have him work in the city. I moved out there to get away from you. Now I come back into the jungle, and everybody knows in the jungle, man, there's animals, and you do not see our humanity. You do not see the love that was in here. The first thing you want to do is judge a whole community by what you seen on the news stations and the tentacles that come from there, the radio stations, the online publications and whatnot. You know, that is what's defining us. And your last arrest or your last encounter, where you might not been up to par as a police officer or law enforcement officer, and you're coming off with that haughty, arrogant, facetious, smart mouth that they have. You know what I mean? And now you get somebody that gives you a look. See, that's why I can't stand them, and I want to slam your face against the edge of the car, or drape you all the way across the car, make you get on the ground.
Do you believe that the white people in that community has the same experience as the black people in that, like, just take that community you're talking about, the Central over on 38th in Chicago. Do you believe that a white person that lives there has the same experiences?
Some of them have like experience as far as to the point of death, no, but some of those folks have like experiences. Well, I don't think it's on the percentile or the per capita thing, man. It may not be the same, but in the same note. That's why I said the optics, the bitterness that's within somebody's stomach. If somebody has a conscience, it has to bother.
Well, because the thing is like, and Kieran, tell me if I'm wrong. With you being the white man here, at the table
The
today,
token.
But when I've been stopped, by the cops.
Yeah.
And like I got an example of when my nephew was in the car with me. We got stopped by the cops. The cops went straight to the passenger side and said, "Hey, give me your ID." You as a white person, have you experienced that? I mean, where there was no reason for the cop to be suspicious. Now, if the cop comes up and there's smell of marijuana coming out of the car or something, but I'm talking about where it's just like you and your son riding around.
So I would say that as I get older, and it is a trip. As I get older, I realize that I'm starting to look like this profile of people who the police assume are loyal supporters of the system, basically. And and it's weird. In my own head, I'm still kind of this angry young teenager, or whatever. And you forget that that's how now people are seeing you, because that's how my face looks. I look like. So I would say that, like, in my experience, anyways. Like I got beat up really bad by the cops as a teenager, but I did the reason they came after me was things I was doing that my black friends didn't have to do all those things to get beat up. They would get beat up by the police just for being a black kid on the corner.
Yes.
Whereas I was like, basically, confronting the cops and this kind of thing. So on the one hand, like, I knew what it was like to be beat up by the cops, and that made me identify with my black friends, but that didn't still mean I knew what it was like to be black, because they got that shit for just stepping outside, but it wasn't, but it was important because it was different than what a rich kid in Edina feels too. And I think to your question about 30th in Chicago, or I think like white working class people, if they're looking at shit right, are able to see, and even though they're not getting treated the exact same thing as a black person or as a Hmong person or as a Latino immigrant, if they're looking at it right, they should, can still see the picture the right way, and still see where their interest is. And I think especially a lot of youth, and in South Minneapolis, sometimes there's kind of a nice mix of like, black, Somali, Native, everything. Latino kids, and that's again that gives me hope. Not that you gotta, you can be friends with whoever, but the thing is like people are open to it and have each other's backs in a way, even if maybe I don't talk to you in school, but I go down the hallway and my crew nods at your crew, and if I see you out in the street and someone's effing with you, we got your back. You know what I mean? And to build that kind of like solidarity mindset. Maybe you're not my favorite people or whatever, you're not my best friend, we might even talk smack to each other, but when the chips are down, you have my back and I have your back, Yeah. And I think that's the thing I want to try and grow and build, And I'm hopeful that there is some people coming out of it. And I will say another thing. Can I rant on a couple more points?
Go ahead. Go
you. Right. So I think that the white people that experience other forms of oppression, like women who experience sexism, or gay people that experience homophobia, or poor people that are always getting shit on, I think that doesn't mean that they aren't capable of being racist, because all those categories of folks are capable of being racist but I do think in a lot of times when you run into anti-racist white folks, it's because they've experienced some kind of oppression, so that's made them have to confront the big picture. It's made them have to look at it. And so I think like a lot of the white folks who I've ended up learning from in terms of anti-racism, a lot of times it's because I think they're more knowledgeable, or they have a bigger picture of it, or got it earlier because of their own struggles with similar kinds of oppression. And so that made them want to figure out racism too. And then I had one more point while it's on my head, which is that I think there's some downfalls I see white anti-racists doing. One is to assume that I'm the perfect white person. I'm the smartest, most anti-racist white person of all. I'm different, and that can become a problem because it's a kind of arrogance that can actually end up reinforcing rather than undoing it. So I never want, I think it's really important to be like, not only do I have a lot to learn from black folks about racism, but I may have things to learn from other white people about racism. Yeah. I'm not the freaking genius on this, you know what I mean? And then the other thing is about when we were talking about language and that whole discussion can happen, I find that sometimes the people that I think show that kind of solidarity, like I have your back, you have my back, they may not have all the language right. They might not have been taught all the right language.
But the behavior.
Yes. So if you just are going off, do I know the right way to say this or that? Because sometimes you can run into some people that maybe they've just been around some shit, so they don't have the right words, and they can even say some stuff that's offensive sometimes, just because they haven't been in the right place. But you can have some other people that know all the right vocabulary and can say all the right stuff, but you still have this kind of weird elitist. They still have a. So I think you really got to go on how people act, like you said, like. That's how to judge people, is how do they actually function in this world. And then they can catch up. You can explain to somebody why the way you're saying this is wrong, and they can learn the terminology.
And I think that's the difference between ignorance and ignoring.
All right.
Ignorance,
I like that.
Yeah. You call somebody ignorant, and they get upset and they want to fight you in a heartbeat. Ignorant means you simply don't know.
Right.
Steve, build me a spaceship. I'm ignorant.
Yeah.
I simply do not know. But if you say you're hungry, because Stevie D likes to cook.
Right.
If you're hungry and I don't feed you, it's not because I'm ignorant, because I ignored you. Wherein lies the crime? Not knowing or not doing.
That's a good one. I might have to use that one.
There's empathy and sympathy. How are you looking at this, with empathy or sympathy? Oh, bless his heart. Or, man, how is your heart? See, so and that's what I'm trying to put across with those three little things that I put together. Am I ignoring your pain, or am I ignorant to your pain? I think more people are ignoring my pain than are ignorant to my pain. You know what I'm saying? I see more people that say, oh, bless his heart, and throw me some couple of dollars, throw it towards a cause, instead of, man, how is your heart? And what can I do to bring joy? Or to a happier point. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So that's what I'm trying to draw. Don't do those things. Don't ignore me. Don't pat me on my head. Don't just throw me a couple dollars. Get in here, put your hand on the plow, grind with me, and you and I together go forward like Tubbs and Crockett, salt and pepper, whatever. Just keep it moving and go that way. Or whatever Bill Cosby and that other cat's name was. Robert, what was his name? Robert Stack was his name? Robert Stack and Bill Cosby. The little I Spy, was it I Spy?
I don't think I've ever seen it.
There was a salt and pepper team back in the back in the day. But we're gonna have to move forward like that. When they see us actually locking arms and marching forward, not taking the BS, man, going through every valley and up every hill together, man. It's like, oh, they're going to crest over a hill. Watch, the brother's going to fall down and the white dude's going to fall down. One of them's only coming up. They won't come up. Well, there they are. See, when they see us keep, each horizon, they keep seeing us together, and then they see the growth of us and the different hues of us. Then they got to say, this is something serious that I have to take into account. Otherwise, I'm left behind as they all move forward.
Yeah. When Steve, myself, and my son Wesley over there, initially we had started, this was right after, I think, the George Floyd thing, was it? Yeah, when we started those presentations. In our in the first present, or we had a space out in Brooklyn Park, and we tried to bring people together, and just have open discussion. So our first discussion was trying to get people of all different backgrounds to come and just have the talk. Let's get together, be open, be frank. Like Steve was saying. I mean, people have to be able to feel like they're coming into a safe environment where they can actually say how they feel. So I mean, I'm hoping that we can do that with this podcast. I don't mind having someone come on here that's completely opposite of Kieran's from where Kieran is at on the spectrum of white sentiment. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, but
I might have to wait outside for him.
No, man, we're gonna have you at the table with him. I mean, hey, Steve and I, we disagree on these podcasts a lot, man. I mean,
I know. I think it's why it's good. You guys have good debates. I enjoy it.
But I mean, I really do hope that at some point, man, we can get to a place of understanding. I mean, see, the way that I guess in my lifetime approached white people, dealing with white people, even though, like I said, man, my mother's white, you know, but I think she taught us a lot about how to deal with her people, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, it takes a lot for me to get to a place where I trust them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to go back to that analogy with the dog. You know, that dog has to show me that, hey, I'm not going to bite you like that previous 100 dogs.
Yep.
You know, you're safe putting your hand down here petting me. You know what I'm saying? See, and my experience is I just don't seem to run into too many. And like I said, some people that I've worked with and then I've come to know over the last 10 years, they've impressed me a lot, and it has changed my opinion. But I still see a lot of young people, like in my own family, sons, nephews, that they don't seem to be as receptive to, you know, this whole concept of inviting other people into the conversation. You know, I mean, like, you know, like I said, I'm debating with people a lot. So, you know, while you're saying that the young generation of white kids might be at a point where they're a little bit more understanding, I almost think that a lot of the people in the black community, the young people in the black community, are pushing away. So how do we get the young blacks and the young whites to get to a point where, hey, you know, when one extends their hand over, the other extends it to meet them halfway? Because you know, from what I'm hearing from a lot of young black people, is they're not open to that anymore.
Yeah.
I can see that. You know, I can see where it's happening. You know, when people are hurt, they internalize. You know, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of being hurt.
I know, but they blame people like in our generation for things even getting to the place where we have to talk about George Floyd in 2020. You know what I'm saying? You know, so and like I said, Kieran, I'm glad that you're on here to
Right.
because I do believe that having these conversations, especially with someone that has a true grasp and understanding of the issue. You know, and I know that you teach your kids the same thing. You know, that's a very valuable thing, man.
I think it's probably good that young people are fed up, though, man. I think it's probably good that because I mean, in some ways, like I want unity and I want people to come together, but it can't be just like cheap. You know what I mean? I mean the way it is, the way the system is set up now. And I think a lot of young people are just like, or the feeling I get anyways, is that a lot of young people are just through with fake stuff, right? They have their fake detector is turned way up, you know, and anything that doesn't come across as real. And now we have, you know, so much, we can get like AT&T, to use one corporation name, but all these corporations rolling out their official anti-racist programs, and now, you know, blah blah blah, and you have these big white corporate executives telling you how anti-racist they all are, and it's just like they're the people that thrive off of this system, you know, and so I think a lot of people they're real suspicious of anything, and they don't want to like. So I kind of think that's good, though. That's good for the young white people, because then they have to not only just put out their hand, like you said, but they have to really hustle, you know, like, isn't going to be good enough just to say, you know, I'm not racist, by the way, you know, okay, so what are we going to do?
Well, one of my favorite lines was an old white dude that was a Texan, and I'm not sure if he was just a politician in Texas or he was part of LBJ's administration. But he comes up there, he's got the hat on, he's running up the little Capitol steps, man, or Texas Capitol steps, and somebody stops him and they're like, so-and-so, we heard you don't like black people. He turns around, looking in the face, I don't. He took a couple more steps. He said, by the way, I don't like white people either. He said, if you ain't good people trying to move this state forward, man, I don't want to have nothing to do with you. And he turned around and ran up the steps, man. That was it, man. I dug the line. And I've never forgot it, because he turned around and looked at his face. Well, I don't. Because what he was saying there is, because if that is all you are, is white. If all you are is black, where's your growth? That's right. How do you grow into all the different things you need to be? How do you have branches that bear fruit, you know, if that's all you are?
Well, what do you got something you want to close out with, or did you want to continue the conversation?
I'm already gonna be late for study tonight, man. That I told you, man. Adam wanted me online today, but it's like, hey, Adam,
Hey,
man,
I
this
think
is what I do.
this is this is a very good, man. I really like some of the stuff that was said on here today, man. You know, I mean, I really believe that this is where we're gonna have to go if we want to see the change that I think we all want to see. We're gonna have to learn to cross lines, get in uncomfortable space, express your opinions.
You know, I know the area that he grew up in, man, because I got family that grew up in that whole area. Then I have the ones that grew up down here where Sean and my granny and all them run, you know, because they went to Central, we went to Washburn, you know. Well, we went to Washburn, man. It was not unusual, man, for me to see cats that was in Richfield or the borders southwest over by Roosevelt be in a house party over north. And you would hear the brothers cuss about, man, dude, I invited you to my party, man. Where the hell were you? Woo, woo, woo. Likewise, if the brothers didn't, I'm going to show up at the keg, woo, woo, woo. I'm going to hang out, da-da-da-da, man. And you weren't there, dude, grab you, man. Where were you? It was like, man, we had to come for you and everything.
Cheap hitting on me. You see that?
Oh, no, man. I ain't gonna do one of them. I'm going to be like, it's an accident. But that's the time that I grew up in. And I thought we would launch from there, not slip off that platform. You know what I mean?
Well,
we slipped from where our childhood was.
We elected the devil 4 years ago, man.
Well, you know,
he set this country back 40 years, man.
He, you know what? All he did was say what had been said in boardrooms, locker rooms, clubhouses, golf houses, you know what I'm saying, the clubhouse. He brought those things to the forefront.
And on Main Street. And in the houses on Main Street.
Right, that too, you know. But all this did was open something that had been trickling out for a while. And sometimes, you know, I'd rather have it all exposed. You know what I mean? As ugly as it was, man, this is probably just like the burn victim. You know what I'm saying? In order for that person to heal, you got to peel the skin off. There's a painful process in order for the good skin to come in and start healing. I think we are going through that peeling that, you know, that the burn victim goes through.
Well, I think that's where all this insurrection and all this stuff is coming from. I think those are people that are fighting tooth and nail.
They didn't get what they were promised.
For white supremacy. They know that this country is slipping out of their hands. They know it.
They didn't get what they were promised. They see that this, you know, the lies and the exaggerations have worked. Now it's like, I can see this picture, and if I keep acting a complete damn fool, I can probably get this to happen. Now, they're going after something at one point in time I don't believe, and I'm talking about people, man, because the white supremacists aren't out there by themselves. There's some brothers and sisters out there now that have bought in too. However, I don't think that if they were able to storm the Capitol and take over the government and do everything that they had not planned to do, you know, because they didn't have no plan. They just wanted to break out windows and stuff. There was no contingency plan, no replacement for what they wanted to tear down. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
None whatsoever. And had they got their chance, their opportunity, brother, sister, Ali, whatever his name is, this dude just keep putting out all the tats and stuff, man.
Dude, man.
You know, he can't look like he might be from the Middle East. I don't know. I'll let you know. Just check him out for yourself, y'all. I'm just saying he don't look like. He looked like that they would put him on a do not fly list. I'll put it like that. I don't think that those folks that were out there running around, I don't think the country or government that was coming up next had you in their purview at all.
Let me ask Kieran one. Kieran, I mean, this kind of goes a little bit off, but you had touched on like the George Floyd, you know, murder and stuff. Do you think that the response was a little excessive, or I mean, you know, with the burning down the city and just the things that they did, or do you believe that was just something that was necessary?
Well, I think a few things. Like if you ask me about it, I think there were some stores that got burned down that should not have been burned down for sure. But whose fault is that? Like if you look at it like, you know, Mike Freeman, they didn't charge those police until
Ellison.
until the fire started. I mean, they in fact they had a plan. Freeman was already putting in a plan to try and get him off on some lesser charge. That was because to Freeman, because that's how it had already been done before. So why not do it that way, right?
That's why they hurry up took him off there.
Yeah,
Came out
they
in
had
front of
to.
his house.
They knew they had to because
Good
they were going
old
to lose
boy.
the city. They
Good
were
old
going to lose
boy.
the city.
Man, I
There's
mean,
also a white man that started the riot, the Umbrella Man.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Really, and it was the provocation of any destruction outside of the.
yeah,
city.
yeah. Did you see the clip on the?
Yeah,
on the
but I was down there,
Okay.
and like by the time that Umbrella Man supposedly happened, like Target was already being looted, Cub was already being looted, and like I think that this is my opinion is that they tried to put it on somebody to try and discredit everything that was going on, like because all these basically it was thousands of poor people of all different races were down there, and to try and like take away that power, they said, oh, it wasn't really the legitimate community, it was this one, outside agitator who did it.
I kind of felt like it was like to demonize the movement and to make it look worse than it was, so that there would be a more violent response from the anti.
That
Yeah.
and that's
social
how
justice or
Mm-hmm.
that's what it felt like to me.
that's
Yeah.
how I feel about the cat that was in New York. Dude had the gray hair, he had an all black, and he had the rock hammer. And he was just busting chunks of rocks out of the curb.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody ran up to him and said, "Don't do it." This cat almost pooped on himself, man. Oh, but he was out there
Mm-hmm.
inciting
Mm-hmm.
and providing.
Mm-hmm.
See, he was the worst cat out there to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get my hands dirty, but here's some mud.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the cops that were filmed sitting down with a pallet of bricks.
Mm-hmm.
I think at some point in Oregon, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe it was New York.
Yeah, but no, this cat had a rock hammer, man, and he was just right there in front of the big stores out there knocking chunks out of the curbs, man. And then one of the Black Lives Matter people grabbed him. I believe it was a Black Lives Matter person grabbed the dude to make him stop doing it. Because the minute that you plant that seed, that stuff grow quick, like miracle grow. You know?
well, I would just like to see us just not fall for the bait, just one time. Just one time.
Mob mentalities like that.
It's not always like that. We've had protests that didn't burn down the city before.
Yeah, but
I mean,
mob mentalities like that. If it's something that takes over, man, where everybody gets real frenzied and fanatical, you know what I mean, and people lose control.
yeah, but like I
Period.
said, man, I know a lot of people that were in that mob, including a couple people in this room. You know what I'm saying?
They didn't get caught up.
That didn't participate in that. Just because other people are doing bad things does not excuse you in participating and jumping in on the bad activity.
Not at all. I would never agree with that. But you could sit back, man, and you can watch. There's a situation, man, where we played over at Edison over here, man, playing football. And there was one guy in the crowd, man, that had graduated a few years before. Here we are, 16, 17 years old. This guy is 21, 22 at the time. That's a big difference when you're in high school. At least
Yeah,
it
it is.
appears
It's an
that
adult.
way.
Yeah.
And this cat's out here just woof, 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 trying to play hard, big man on campus, man. Woof, 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 talking crap, man, all the racial slurs. Next thing you know, it starts to keep coming up, man. Now they all up on the fence right behind us, man. You know what I'm saying? Now it's time to get on the bus. Now this crowd wants to follow us to the bus, man. All bets off now. All bets off, man.
Well-
We got to taking helmets and smashing people in the face and clonking them over the head, man. And guess who caught it? The loudmouth that got everything started, man. One of the twins, and if you know if you just say Washburn and the twins, you know who I'm talking about almost. L&T, last name begins with an A, so I know you know who I'm talking about. Terry turns around, man, smashes dude right in the face, man, splits it, man. That dude's just starting to drip, man. Then the coaches want to get involved. Hey, get that kid. Look what he did. Man, you had an opportunity to control the kids in your own backyard, to keep them off our side of the field and stop approaching the fence and threatening us as we got on the bus. But then when all hell broke loose, man, it's like, oh, these fools is holding their mud, man. They're going to hold down their square. Then it was like, oh, look what happened. Dude, Neil, what's his name? Neil Schultz or whatever the coach's name was. You should have stepped up and you should have used your authority, man, as a pedagogue, a teacher, a coach, man, to get up and say something to him. Man, that's not the type of school we have. That's not how we're operating out here. Get out.
Right.
Is what should have been done.
Right.
But you had to wait until he got his head split. And then the kids from Washburn were wrong.
Right.
Come on, man. That story gets played over and over as well.
Yeah.
But I know who you better not mess with.
Who was that?
Patrick Malloy. The boy, him and Pat, both of them. Pat and Sean will tie you behind in the knot, man. Some damn good wrestlers, man.
Tough kids, yeah.
Am I lying? They will wrestle you, to the dirt, man. To the dirt. And get right back up, man. Plain and simple. Are we done? Okay. Have a good day. he enjoyed himself.
No, I hear you.
For real.
All
cool
right, man.
kids.
You got anything you want to close out with?
I think I'm
You good?
Yeah.
How about you? Anything else you want to?
I was just thinking. No, I'm playing.
All right. Well,
Thanks a lot, man.
we're gonna attach a couple videos to the end of this podcast that just kind of has a little relation to what we discussed today. So, thanks again for joining us on Dialogue to Destiny. We appreciate your consistent listening, and that'll do it for this podcast.
Thank you.
Peace.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Dialogue to Destiny. We sincerely hope you enjoyed today's show. All of us here truly appreciate your continued support. A simple way to support our show is by giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. This free action helps boost the show tremendously. We are committed to improving the content and quality of this podcast and are always open to any and all suggestions. If you wish, you can always contact the host of the show at the email shown on screen or simply leave a comment. Feel free to recommend topics or even guests for future shows. Again, thank you for your support, and we will see you next time on Dialogue to Destiny.
So we have to understand the past in order to understand what's going on now. It's not just with the presidency, though. It's with the inequalities that you see when you look around. Like, for instance, if you don't understand the history of law enforcement misconduct in black space, in black communities, Black Lives Matter won't make any sense to you. Now, I want to be very clear when I talk about the history of law enforcement misconduct. I'm not talking about every damn cop. I'm not talking about good cops and bad cops, good people and bad people. I'm talking about a history and a culture of law enforcement that has simply not treated black and brown peoples the same as white folks. And anyone who denies that what I just said is true has not studied history and is not competent to speak about it, right? Because the history of policing traces directly back to slave patrols. That was the first iteration of law enforcement on this land in any real formal sense. It was police, after all, who enforced the slave codes. It was police who enforced segregation after slavery was ended. It was police who conspired to engage in lynchings of thousands of black bodies, releasing suspected criminals or people who weren't even suspected of a crime into the hands of the mob. It was police that pulled protesters off of sit-in stools in the 1960s. It was police that turned water cannons and dogs on children in the streets of Birmingham. It was police that did the same and beat protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. It was cops, along with uniformed military personnel, that rampaged in Mexican-American communities in Los Angeles during the Zoot Suit riots in 1943. That was law enforcement. It wasn't just average people. It was people whose job was to, quote unquote, enforce the law. The problem is, if you live in a society where the laws are unjust, everyone who enforces those laws is engaged in injustice by definition, you see? It's not about good people and bad people. It's about if a system is flawed, the people who enforce that system are culpable. And people of color know that, right? Black folks know, for instance, and brown folk know that it's law enforcement that enforces the war on drugs, which is not about drugs. And we know it's not about drugs. Two reasons that I know it. Number one, the data tells me. What does the data tell me? Every source you want to consult says that white folks use drugs and sell drugs and possess drugs at least as often, if not more often, than black and brown folks do. Right? Just as likely to possess, just as likely to use, just as likely to deal. But who gets arrested? We know it's black and brown folks 5 times more likely on average to be incarcerated for drugs. African Americans 4 times more likely to be busted for weed than white folks, even though usage rates for weed are virtually identical. So that's one way that we know it's not about drugs, that we know it's about controlling certain people. And if police are the ones doing that, then why are we surprised that black folks are cynical about policing, right? Why is that shocking? It shouldn't be. The other reason I know the war on drugs is not about drugs is that I'm standing here. And here's what I mean by that. If the war on drugs were actually about drugs, I don't know who'd be giving this talk, but I know it sure as hell wouldn't be me, because I don't think y'all would let me Skype this in from prison, and that's where I'd be right about now if the war on drugs were actually about drugs, and I can admit that because the statute of limitations has expired on this, so nobody can touch me now, right? No, I don't need like applause for weed. Like that's weird. Like you don't need to, woo-hoo, he used to get high. Woo, you know. No, it's all good. My asthma came back. I can't do that anymore. But, and I got kids. I'm trying to set an example. But my point is, right, if the war on drugs were really about drugs, myself and a whole lot of other white folks would be doing time, right? Because, I worked in public housing projects as a community organizer for about 15 months in the 90s, and I saw fewer drugs in public housing than I saw on a typical weekend on the 8th floor of the dorm where I lived my freshman year of college at Tulane University, uptown in New Orleans, right? I saw fewer drugs in 15 months in public housing than I saw on a typical Saturday night in room 804, y'all, which I think was my room, but I can't be sure because drugs were involved, but you get the point, right? War on drugs isn't about that. But if law enforcement enforces the law that way, that's why people of color are going to look sideways at cops.
No other group in the AT&T family that I'd rather start this dialogue with than you, the AT&T ERGs, because I'm convinced that what we have done is created something very special here. We've created what is a model for America. You're a model for how you can take a really large body of people with radically different backgrounds, beliefs, ages, religions, sexual orientations, and we're demonstrating how you can not only live together, but you can love each other, you can compete, and you can win together.
Yes.
But sadly, racial tension is ripping apart the very fabric of our communities right now. And it's troubling to watch what's happening today in Charlotte, what's happened in Ferguson, Missouri, the killing of black men in Falcon Heights, Minnesota, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the murder of 5 police officers in Dallas, the murder of police officers in Baton Rouge, the mass killings in Orlando. I could go on, but folks, you get the idea. We got a problem.
Yes, we do have a problem.
Now, there are some that are here tonight that the mentality and the thought process would be the police need to crack down and get control of these communities. There are also some who are expressing some legitimate pent-up anger over injustice and violence and say we have to deal with that first. And there's going to be several people in between those two ends. The question I have to ask is, where are you on this? I suspect that if we took a secret ballot poll, we might be surprised at the outcome of that poll. One of my closest friends in the world is an African American. His name's Chris. And Chris is a cardiopulmonary critical care doctor. He's served our country on 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Chris is one of the most thoughtful, caring, and intelligent human beings that I know. His wife is my wife's best friend. Our kids are really close friends. And after the events in Dallas and Baton Rouge, the pastor of Chris's church asked him if he'd come lead a discussion with their nearly all-white congregation about these events. And his comments were captured on video, and somebody sent the video to me. And when I watched the video, I have to confess that I was stunned by what he said. He gave me permission tonight to share some of what he said with you. And he said the following. He said, "I was the first black boy with his two sisters to integrate elementary schools in southern Louisiana. I remember being afraid as bricks were hurled at our home, and I saw my father fire his shotgun to scare away angry invaders. I was told not to associate with Southern Baptists because in my hometown, the deacon board were all members of the KKK. I've heard more epithets than I can ever describe. I've been called names I would not repeat in mixed company. I have been refused service, followed in stores, asked to serve people in restaurants while I was dining, pulled over in routine traffic stops, and been called boy more times than I care to remember. When I run in the neighborhood to stay healthy, I always make sure I have my driver's license so I can show the police that I actually live in my neighborhood." Now, I will be honest with you. When I watched this video, I was really ashamed that this was all new information to me about Chris. This man lost his teenage son last year to a very tragic disease, and Chris and I have gotten on our knees and prayed to God to save his son together. He stayed in my home many times, and I've stayed with his family many times. I've spent hours with him and his son in the hospital. And I just wonder how I could conceivably not know this about this guy. How could I not understand the very core that formed his worldview about race? I wonder how two very close friends, one black and one white, could never have discussed the matter of race. And then I thought, if two very close friends of different races don't talk openly about this issue that's tearing our communities apart, how do we expect to find common ground and solutions for what's a really serious, serious problem? I have another friend who told me a story. It was about a man visiting a little town called Shady Lake. It's a beautiful town. It's tucked against a very nice flowing river. And as the man walked through this town as a visitor, he began to notice that many of the people were missing arms and missing legs. He stopped at a nice restaurant on the river and sat down to order, and the waiter came up to him and he asked the waiter, "What's going on? Why are so many people maimed and wounded?" And the waiter said in a whisper, he said, "In that river is a huge alligator. And regularly that alligator comes out of the river and attacks our residents." And the man said, "This is crazy. Why don't you do something about it?" And the waiter said, "It's considered impolite to discuss this in public." We're living in Shady Lake, folks. And our communities are being destroyed by racial tension. And we're too polite to talk about it. Even among our best friends. We don't even talk about it among our best friends. And it's a difficult, tough issue. It's not pleasant to discuss. It takes work, it takes time, it takes emotion. And you're going to have to understand where the other one is coming from. But we have to start communicating. And if this is a dialogue that's going to begin at AT&T, I feel like it probably ought to start with me. I have always been somewhat confused by some of Chris's views. And now I got to tell you, I get his anger when somebody responds to a Black Lives protest by saying all lives matter. I honestly, I have to admit that Chris is a bigger man than me, because if I were in his shoes, I would be a bitter and angry man, and Chris is not. And I would tell you, my confusion now with his views has been replaced by a really healthy dose of humility. Chris went on to paraphrase something, and I want you to hear this. He said, when a parent says, I love my son, you don't say, what about your daughter? When we run or walk for breast cancer funding and research, we don't say, what about prostate cancer? When the president says, God bless America, we don't say, shouldn't God bless all countries? And when a person struggling with what's been broadcast on our airwaves says, Black Lives Matter, we should not say all lives matter to justify ignoring the real. Let's talk about race. When we talk about race, let's begin the discussion with why. Why does my colleague feel this way? If we can understand why, it's so much more likely that we could begin to agree on what needs to be done. You guys, the AT&T ERGs, you are a model for America. Look around. Look around, folks. It does not get any more diverse than this. I want you to hear something, and this is really important, and I want to finish with this, but I'm not asking you to be tolerant of each other. Tolerance is for cowards. Being tolerant requires nothing from you but to be quiet and to not make waves, holding tightly to your views and judgments without being challenged. Do not tolerate each other. Work hard, move into uncomfortable territory, and understand each other. I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of you. I really do. I love this organization. I love you people. And I really appreciate your patience listening to me tonight. And I encourage you, please, let's go out and understand each other, okay? Thank you so much.